Okay, kids, it's 2:03 now, so we're going to get started here.
I have the recording started, Ron.
Thank you, Fred.
You bet. Nice to get
Appreciate that.
Yep.
And so I want to welcome everybody to our little gathering today. Thanks to you. We have a couple of guests. We have, I guess, just one guest, Russell's friend, Jim Petro. Good afternoon, Jim. For those
Hey,
that don't know him, Jim is out in the Reno area, so he's way far away.
Yeah, he used to be a neighbor of mine.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Jim used to be a Louisville man. So we're going to get started now, and Paul Downs is going to lead her off.
There we go. All right, so this is about building the structure that is in downtown Louisville between Baxter and Broadway with the L&N grade separation project. Apparently, the neighbors were getting tired of having all the main roads into Louisville being blocked by the L&N, so they elevated the track from around Baxter Avenue, where Baxter Station is, across Baxter Avenue here, there's Liberty there, across Broadway, across Breckenridge, and on up the hill where it tapers back into the regular grade. So this is about 1.5 miles. In real life, mine is, this would be 50 feet in N scale, I guess 100 feet in HO. I have about 4.5 feet of it on my layout, so selective compression. And this is the structure. You're probably familiar with it. It's pretty imposing. It's very interesting. There's lots of details. Luckily, it's still there, so I was able to go down and measure everything and get the sizes of all the different structural shapes. And a lot of reference pictures here so I could get a feel for it. The Beargrass Creek that runs along the side of the structure for most of its length. All the details underneath, all the cool stains and rust marks, and just getting a feel for how this thing is put together. Then, of course, you have to decide with your scratch building, are you going to build a big box? Oops, sorry about that. Build a big box and cover it with plastic? Or is it going to be more of a structural thing like this where you're going to see all the structural shapes? In a building like this, I wouldn't need to put in rafters, joists. You guys are thinking, well, why didn't you? Well, yeah, sure. But something like this, you have to. So this is more of a bridge kind of construction. Then you have to start planning things out. I always say I never start anything until it's finished, meaning that I get it in my head how I'm going to put it together, and then I start sketching things out. So this was drawn using Macintosh program Pages. Most people use it as a word processing program. I use it for graphic work a lot of times. And each one of these different pieces here represents a different piece of evergreen plastic. And those of you who have messed with evergreen, these are the evergreen part numbers you're probably familiar with, and the sizes. This is what I was going to use them with. I've got some Plastruct in there too for the columns, the hex pieces. And I figured out how much I was going to need, and cleaned out Brian a couple of times to get all the stuff I needed. These were drawn to scale for me so that it would make it a little easier when I was measuring pieces and trying to determine exactly how big everything was going to be. This is the bridge. You can see here that this is obviously 4 lanes across plus some side lanes, which would make it probably 55, 60 feet across. I made mine 26 feet, but tried to keep the detail. So this is just drawing out how I was going to build the bridge. This is how it's going to be laid out on the module. These blue dots here represent the columns, so I was trying to space them out to figure out how many I was going to actually need for this. And this was drawn using, I can't think of the name of it now, just a little model railroad drawing program. This is the module itself. It's about 5 feet long. Nice thing about Fremo is you don't have to worry about how long anything is. These sections here are where the track was going to be laid on anything that wasn't part of the structure I was building. So you can see here, the track would run all the way to this one, and then down the ramp here, and down the ramps here and here. You can kind of see how that works here, how it's laid out on the module when I was making sure everything was going to fit. I had a bunch of sheet styrene that was 20 hundredths thick, the 0.02, and I glued 3 of those together to give me the 0.06 thickness that I wanted, drew the track centers on it, laid out the track pieces just to make sure everything was going to work okay. One of the few non-scratch built structures is a kit bash using the Atlas bridge. This is the actual length of the little Atlas bridge, and I cut it down almost in half to use for the viaduct. It just shows how you can take these pieces, cut them down, glue them back together, and recreate something that's the size you need it to be, because I couldn't find any really short bridges like this, and this way I could get the exact length that I wanted. If you don't have a chopper and you're going to be doing a project like this, you need a chopper. This has a razor blade in it and a little handle that raises up and down. You can see here you can put a stop in for the length that you need and duplicate pieces, because this thing has, I don't know, 700, 800 pieces of plastic cut in it. And if I had to cut all of these, measure each one, cut them all by hand, basically, it would take forever. But here I can cut these pieces and start gluing my columns together. You can see here that I've sketched out on this craft paper the shape of the bridge, and I'm just starting to piece things together here, making sure things are going to work. And this is the base for the viaduct. I scribed in the sidewalk lines. And I'm test fitting pieces to make sure things are going to work the way I think they're going to. This is a Plastruct railing, and I glued some plastic on the back of it to make it look more like the prototype. And you can see how I drew it on the paper. These are some abutments that I'm putting together that go on the side of the bridge. One of the more interesting things was, how was I going to put in the L&N logo and the build date on the bridge? These are Plastruct letters glued upside down on plastic. And then I added some little details on the letters so that they would more closely match what L&N had and open things up a little bit. Notice that it's on a little raised panel there. And obviously I'm holding something on the back. I glued a piece of styrene on the back to make a little handle for this. Then I took some modeling clay. You get this stuff. It's you get it at any craft store. Rolled it out to a certain thickness. I used my thing there to stamp into the clay, cut the pieces out, and then you put them in the oven and you bake them for about 25 minutes or so. And it sets the clay, but it doesn't become hard or brittle. You can carve it very easily with a knife, and it remains somewhat flexible. I don't know how long that flexibility lasts, but once it's glued in place, I don't think I'd have to worry about it anymore. So here's the bridge almost complete with the sections that I'm going to put in, the build date and the logo for L&N. Cut the openings out, glued them on the back, put those little panels in place. And here's a good shot of how you can see that Atlas bridge fits in nicely on top of the structure. Okay, this is the bottom of the bridge deck. I glued styrene strips along the bottom to give it a nice rigid, rigidity all the way across. Wasn't too I didn't really care too much about the spacing on this because you're never going to see the bottom. Notice that these channels here are open. And again, I just made these by gluing styrene, 3 pieces of styrene together for this. And notice they're open, and that's going to be important when I put the columns in. And again, my chopper to chop these things down and spaced out. Ever so often on the actual structure, you had 2 of these beams that would go across. So here's a double one there. And here I am putting in the little pieces that are going to support the curb that goes along the edge here. You can kind of see there's holes drilled in there if you look real carefully. I'll show you the holes later on. That's where the railing goes. Made a little jig to get the outside part, that last outside beam to be the exact distance from the edge. That little jig helps me glue it in place. I use jigs quite often for things like that. If you didn't have a chopper, would you really want to measure and cut all these by hand? I mean, you know, come on. Notice that they're all the same height too, even though the bridge, you know, tapers in at the end on both ends. Notice they're all the same height. Made a little piece here to cut the cut holes in it to keep the columns all the right length, and see how they sit down inside that channel. That's why the channel was left open, so they could sit down inside there and stand off the bottom, make them smooth, add a little footer on the bottom to hold everything in place. Test fitting it on the module and letting it kind of sink down a little bit because it was, you know, sitting straight up in midair. So this kind of gets it to bend a little bit, become more the shape it needs to be to fit on the module. Took it outside, spray painted it with a primer of a light concrete color, and then started the detail paint, different layers of grays and concrete colors to give it the effect, a little weathering on it. If you cut a slit in a piece of plastic, it's easier to control when you want to make your rust stains and splatters. And once you put a little grime over this, that's going to kind of tone that down a little bit. This curb here that holds all of the posts had to have holes drilled in it. So I took that strip and I put it in a jig that I made, this little drilling jig, and it slides back and forth in that jig. And then I would drill a hole here, slide it down until I saw that hole here, and then drill another hole, slide it down until I saw the hole, drill another hole, and then glue all these little pieces in. It's interesting, they're on 12-foot centers. And I went down and measured it twice because I thought, who in the world would put a railing up on a 12-foot center? But it is a 12-foot center. I thought that was an awfully long way for a railing span, but that's what it is. Another little jig here that holds the bottom rail in place so I can get it to the right height each time. And the wiring, running leads from all of the track, of course. Those little pieces on the bottom, I was able to stick the wires up into those openings and then bundle them all up. I built a little box in here to put all the wires through later on. And then I glued the whole thing down to the module, put some screws in to hold it in place. And again, these are all the same height, so I didn't have to worry about, you know, how high did this have to be. I just glued them all straight down. Because then I got a bunch of spackling compound and just put it in underneath and slowly began to bury these columns and began to slowly rise up. As you can see here, how it tapers up. And again, all these columns, even the one up here, is the same length, but same height, but it can taper down there. And there's my cows. There's a meat packing plant that goes right here. And of course, you're ballasting and weathering the track. And Scenic Express rock ballasting works pretty well for me. Here are some overall pictures of the module. It's still under construction. This will be the Bourbon Stockyards area down here. There's my meat packing plant. You can see the ramp going down there. And then the 2 ramps coming here into the Bourbon Stockyards. little viaduct down in there. I'm working on shotgun houses. Those are all scratch built, and I think I'm going to do those in October. Show you guys about that. Turn this thing off here. There we go. All right. And another, there's my bourbon stockyards. I built this thing over 20 years ago. Never had a use for it until now. And that's how my workbench always looks. I am a mess all the time. So, we're back.
Okay, Paul, we just tried to unmute everybody. So those of you that want to speak, you'll have to unmute yourselves. Do we have any questions for Paul?
Yeah, I got one, Paul. How you doing?
There you go.
I know this sounds like a silly question, but in a much smaller area, when you were, some of your opening slides and comments, when you're gluing two sheets of styrene together, I mean, what's the process of that to where you don't have gaps or bubbles or?
When I was laminating those sheets down,
Yes.
I got a couple of jars of the Plastruct styrene, and I would put them together like this, and I would put a little glue in the middle and push it together, a little more glue, push it together, a little more glue, push it together, and that glue, the capillary action kind of spreads out, overlapped the joints, and I'm sure I probably could have found the plastic this exact size I needed, but I had a stack of styrene sheets, so I used what I had.
Yeah, understand. All right.
Yep.
Thanks. Look, great
Yeah,
as always.
Looked so good, it looked like it was almost HO scale.
Oh, HO scale, you need too much detail for that. I like to stick with N.
That's the reason I don't do any O scale modeling.
Oh yeah, you have to put the hinges and the doorknobs on that stuff. Yeah.
I got a question for you, Paul. Where'd you get those nice C clamps that you were using there with the red heads on them?
I think they came in some kind of X-Acto knife kit that I probably picked up, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago. Who knows? But I think that's where they came from. I think it was some kind of X-Acto knife kit they used to have.
Old ones.
They're really old. Yeah. Yeah. I got stuff. I use the same X-Acto knife blades for years. I just have a sharpener and I just sharpen them up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What kind of sharpener?
It's just a knife sharpener, just a
Okay.
little whetstone kind of thing.
Yeah. A fine one. Good idea.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, it looks like you covered everything pretty well, Paul.
That's good.
Beautiful modeling. Thank you very much for sharing. We'll look forward to, in a month or so, to seeing the shotgun house portion. And for those of you today who are expecting to see the shotgun portion today, Paul decided he wanted to do this first, which was fine.
I'm still working on the shotguns. Well, I'm still working on the bridge too, but the shotguns they're coming along. I'm putting the curtains in the windows.
Okay.
Hey, Paul, one thing I gotta say that I do admire your ingenuity is on the L&N and the 1936 cookies that you use. It looks really good.
Yeah.
That really turned out a lot better than I thought it would, and it took me a while to figure out how I was going to do it. But I think we probably all have times when there's something we need to engrave, and it's real easy to do it that way. Just bake that clay. I think I may use that in the future. It's very, very easy to use.
Well, that's really, it's a worthwhile thing to keep in mind and remember. I'm sure it's going to come in handy at some point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or did you add little pieces of styrene to make, like you said, to make it look more like the L&N font? Or
Yeah, I put little feet on it to make it a serif font, and opened up some of the the openings and the letters just a little bit, just to make it a little more clear when because the letters are tapered from the outside in. So I had to mess with them a little bit.
Yeah. Neat.
Yeah, good solution.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, well, we're right on schedule. Good work, Paul.
Thank you.
We're going to now join Mr. Russell Weis and Mr. Steve Lasher, who are going to speak to us about a signaling project that Russ is working on his, what's the name? What railroad do you model, Russell?
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania, okay.
Sure. We're going to try to spend a little time and tell you what's going on today with Russ's signal system on the layout that we have been working on due to the COVID-19 issue. First, let me say a couple things. Prototype signaling is extremely complicated. To me, it's hugely interesting, but I always think you need some fundamental knowledge if you're going to model something well. And I would recommend that you switch back to me there, Ron. There we go. This book, it's by Brian Solomon. It's available on, I think, probably on Amazon. It's extremely informative about the history and the application and how they do it and the manufacturers. It's very interesting. But if you want to know more about it, that's a good place to start. The second thing I was going to say is if there was enough interest, contact Ron or Fred or whatever. I would be happy to do a more thorough clinic on this thing. I was thinking about it this morning, and I said, if you did a 2-day seminar, you would barely scratch the surface. But if there was a sufficient interest out there, I would be happy to try to address it for folks, take a little of the mystery out of it. I know I'm confused by airport runway markings, and Russ seems to have no trouble with that. But he gets kind of glassy-eyed when we talk about signals, permissive or absolute or whatever. So if the interest is out there, just let somebody know and we can work around that. Now, back to Russ. Russ is at Albany. This is a signal bridge I happened to find at Hobby Shop in Paducah. It's going to be installed over there at Albany. It has what we would refer to as absolute signals on it. And the New York Central actually made it fairly easy for us because they only used basically one type of absolute signal for any kind of interlocking. You find absolute signals in interlockings primarily, or at the end of sidings in CTC territory. Then they made it easy in respect that they put 3 heads on everything. So you don't have to worry about modeling a different setup every time. If it's an absolute signal, it's probably going to have 3 heads on it. Now, let me explain absolute signals. Absolute signals are signals on a railroad we call stop and stay signals. You cannot go by them if it's all red. They're giving you a stop indication. You cannot go by them without either permission from the train dispatcher or tower operator to go by it. And you can tell these on the New York Central by the fact that all 3 heads are aligned in a vertical row, vertically. Also, there is an absence of a number plate on anybody's railroad. That's how you could tell an absolute signal was the absence of a number plate. So eventually these are going to be wired up. We're kind of hoping we can persuade the Arduino folks into a situation where we can actually have some functional illumination of these and some provision made for lighting different heads according to the turnout alignment. But that's down the road. But that's going to go in Albany. There are some details that'll go with it. For instance, anytime you have an absolute signal and you have a need to talk to a towerman or a dispatcher, there should be a phone box there. So probably a phone box, a little instrument case, and probably a battery box or two. But that's going to be Albany. And Russ, if you want to move over towards, we'll cover the road crossing at Purina Road next. Oh yes. By the way, Russell wanted me to be sure and thank Stan White. I don't guess Stan is with us today, but Stan White for the backdrop painting. And when he gets over there and you can see the trees, Bob's Kukler's trees, certainly add a lot to the scene there. Purina Road, although technically crossing signals, are for assistance with road traffic, they are part of the signal system. And so one thing to help make this scene more authentic is there's an instrument case there, a battery box, because all these signal circuits worked on low voltage DC, and a phone box. Back in the day that Russ is modeling, there were no radios. And so the primary means of communication with the dispatcher, whatever, was with the line side telephone. And so you couldn't really have too many of those. Any place that you needed one, you'd find one. And the reason, partially the reason that you need one here is because if you look at this turnout on the left-hand side of the screen, down on the end of the one head block tie, you see the little silver box. And that is a circuit controller. That's what tells the signal system how the switch is aligned. And it's nothing but a set of contacts in there. And next to it on the other head block tie is a gizmo is called an electric lock. Electric locks were found in controlled territory, CTC or interlocking limits controlled by a towerman, to prevent the opening of switches in front of a train that didn't have time to stop. If you opened the box, there was a lever or a button in there that you could press, and it would start a timing circuit, and eventually after 5 minutes or so it would unlock the switch and you could throw it. The other solution was to contact the dispatcher on the phone, and he could unlock it for you, which was the preferable way. You contacted the dispatcher and he unlocked the switch. So that's part of the reason for the phone box there. And oops, must be a train coming. Well, okay. So that's Purina Road and the road crossing. We're going to move around the corner now to what we call Purina Road, the signal installation. And Russ, through his efforts, has actually got this pretty well along. It's almost done. He even managed to get the signals illuminated for this session, which they're going to actually be operated with a logic rail is the brand name, a signal animator. And for those of you who have seen the, am I using the right portable light? No. What do we call that, for, Ron? The traveling layout, yes. Those of you seen the K&I's traveling layout, the logic rail signal animators are what makes those signals work. The way they work is they have a photoresistor in between the ties, much as the same way the crossing flashers work. But when that photoresistor is shaded, the signal stays green all the time. When the photoresistor is shaded, it changes the signal to red. As long as it's shaded, it stays red. Once it's unshaded, it starts a timing action. It'll keep the signal red for 30 seconds, then it'll change it to yellow for 30 seconds. And after that, it goes back to green, and it stays green until you shade the resistor again. And at this point, I would have to tell you that what Russ and I are attempting to do here is what I would call a pseudo signal system, or It's really part of the scenery. We're not making any pretense that this is going to operate prototypically, but it is a very convincing animation, if you will. So both these signals and the signals over at Batavia are going to be just operated with the logic rail signal animators. As far as the detail goes here, Russ has been so good at, we've been adding. What we're trying to show here is, if you see next to the rails on both sides is a little gizmo that the New York Central called a automatic train stop, or ATS actuator. And on all of their locomotives that operated on these main lines that were equipped with ATS, they had to be equipped with what we call ATS receiver shoe. And it passed over the actuator. And if the signal were displaying a restrictive indication, anything other than clear, this ATS system would sound a whistle in the cab, and you had 30 seconds to move a handle. It was called a forestalling lever. And by that, I mean, it forestalled a brake application. If you failed to move this handle within 30 seconds, the system would automatically begin applying the brakes and bring the train to a stop. There's quite a story behind that, but we really don't have time to get into that today. That would be something, if we ever did a clinic, that I would be happy to explain. But certain railroads used ATS. It was a invention or development of New York Central and General Railway Signal, which was online in Rochester, New York. Pennsylvania developed what they call a continuous coded cab signal, and they worked with Union Switch and Signal at Swissvale. So it's a different thing altogether, but it's much too long to explain now. Just suffice it to say, the actuators are part of the detailing for the signal system to make it more New York Central in feel. Now, one thing we did find is that on the New York Central, their specifications in their signal book call for these actuators to be a minimum of 70 feet from the signal that they're protecting. Well, 70 feet is almost a passenger car, an HO, and it would be so far that it would really wouldn't even look right. It'd be like part of another scene. So we decided that 40 feet would kind of capture the effect without looking really odd. So every place that there is a signal, eventually we'll need signal actuators. So, okay, yeah, go ahead. We're ready to move on here anyway. He'll be going by Syracuse. He has the, excuse me, the signal bridges ordered for Syracuse, and once Syracuse is all done, it's going to be pretty spectacular in its own right, signaling wise, and probably the most complicated piece of signaling on the entire layout. Now, eventually, he's going to get around the corner here to Batavia. Batavia is the other location for another set of permissive signals. Once he gets there, you'll see these. The signal has number plates attached to them.
Here's all the trees from Cooper.
Oh yes, and when some more Bob Kukler trees really add a lot to the scene. Thank you, and some more Stan White backdrop, which here again adds a lot. And Russ is certainly very appreciative, and as am I. It's looking really good. Now you'll see the signals at Batavia coming into view. Russ sweated blood and got them to actually got the LEDs installed, so they actually are lit. Here again, they will eventually be functional with the logic rail signal animator. And these particular signals I scratch built out of brass tubing. I think I used a lot of 0.32 or 32 thousandths Tichy phosphor bronze wire, some DA flat brass bar stock, and some Plano grating for the top of them. But those are all about 75% of it's soldered together. The remaining 25% or so is ACC, but the big components, main components, are held together with solder. Now, this signal head, or this signal that's illuminated, is actually built from Oregon Railway Supply signal heads and components, and that's Russ and I were talking about it. I said nobody would ever accuse Oregon Railway Supply of making super detailed signal models, but for a functional signal that you want to build for a particular location yourself, they're very good. Now, this signal that Russ is looking at is as close to scale as I could make it. It uses showcase miniatures, searchlight signal heads, the masts, all the components are as close to scale as I could make them. So it is slightly smaller than the other one, but when you compare them, you know, had I not told you this, I'm not sure that you would have guessed it on your own. It's the necessity of fishing these little 31, 32 gauge magnet wires down these masts that makes it desirable to use a slightly larger tubing. Now, one other thing that I would point out about the other signal that we were looking at, yeah, the one on the left there, the scale one, there are certain situations on Russell's layout where you'll never be able to see the front of the signal. Therefore, why waste a lot of time and money on making it functional when you can't even see it? So therefore, the decision was, this is actually a dummy signal. It's there for scenery. You can see the back of it, which the detail on the showcase miniature signal heads and stuff it shows up really nicely, and you don't have to worry about trying to light it. Showcase Miniatures does offer the LEDs. In theory, you could make a working signal, but I don't know. We'd have to turn that over to one of you N-scalers because these things are small when you start actually working with them. But hopefully I have a few more of those signals left in me because we need some more. But we can save some money by using the dummy signals where you can't see them anyway. There needs to be a signal there model-wise, but it doesn't need to function. Which the last thing I guess I would say about this is, as I was telling Russell, I said, you know, prototype doesn't put a signal system in until they absolutely have to, nor do they go to something as advanced as CTC until they really get pushed because of the traffic levels or whatever to do it. It's expensive. And Russ can tell you for a fact that it ain't cheap on a model either. And even in this pseudo system that we have concocted that's not necessarily prototypically functional, it still ain't cheap. And so I don't know the people that you know, like we had, you know, Bob or Jerry Albers on, and he's an electrical engineer, so he probably is ahead of the game on understanding what he needs to do and can do an entire layout. Bruce Chubb's kind of in the same boat. You know, he's had some articles about the signaling system on his layout. And if you're an electrical engineer, you probably grasp it right away. On the other hand, it has a tendency to put me to sleep. So, that is the gist of the signal system. It's growing, and we're working on it. And after I see those lit, we're going to continue with it because it's just adds too much to the layout. It's just as long as Russ's wallet holds out, we're okay. So that's it from Eastwood. Any questions out there?
We just unmuted everybody, so if anybody has any questions, go ahead and pipe up now. Questions, anyone? I'd just like to say that we had a practice run on this presentation on Thursday, Fred and I with Russ and Steve, and we made a few suggestions, and you guys knocked it out of the park today. Nice presentation.
Oh yeah, it's great. If you're not monitoring chat, you might want to go take a look in there. I've put 2 links in there for the book that Steve suggested earlier. One from Amazon, of course, and the other one, Google Books, if you are okay with reading it online and not paying anything for it. That might be an option for you.
And I just like to say that I don't see too many people asleep. A couple of people are kind of hunched over their desks, but most people are still awake. And based on that, we'd like to invite you, Mr. Lasher, to join us on October 10th at 2 p.m. with a signal seminar so we can learn more about railroad signaling. It's a subject I certainly am no expert on.
Well, like I was telling, gosh, you could spend days. I mean, it's extremely, it has a varied history, let's put it that way. And it does have a very interesting history. Goes way back. And the thing about these things is these signal apparatus were built like proverbial tanks. There was no such thing as planned obsolescence on the railroad. And as you well know, I think all of us here, they lasted and lasted for years. Of course, I assume they had more maintenance issues, but they were built to last, and so they did. And every railroad had their own particular way of looking at things. I thought it was interesting when I worked for the Cotton Belt and Rock Island. The Uniform Code of Operating Rules is what we operated under, and it had exactly two pages for signal indications. I was looking at Russ's 1956 New York Central Rules of the Operating Department. It has 14 pages of signal indications in there. So they tried to actually, fine tune the speeds that you could operate, but that, and they inherited several different railroads. So it just to me, it's a fascinating subject. I told Russ, I said, I guess you're lucky that you found somebody that absorbed everything that they could about signal systems, because I just thought it was interesting.
Okay, any more questions before we leave Russell and Steve?
I was just glad I spent 41 years working in the mechanical department on a railroad. I didn't have to learn red from green, man. No, it didn't matter.
You probably didn't even have to take a color blindness test, did you?
No, actually, you're right. I did. Not in 1969 when I started. That's a standard deal now. When after I retired, as some of you know, I went back to work as a consultant for a year and a half and taught down at the NS school in Atlanta, taught new hires. And so, yeah, I found out that everybody had to take a colorblind test now, but no, we didn't matter for us back then. Everybody's, all the boxcars are pretty much the same color brown, so it didn't really matter.
The dirt's roughly the same color.
Yeah, and so yeah, so I had never really learned much about signaling, and I was kind of happy with that. I did just fine not knowing it.
Well, that was one of the, for what it's worth, in the mechanical department, the carman and stuff was one of the jobs that I had no desire to do, and B, a lot of respect for, because it takes a lot of guts to crawl around under a derailed car, because you don't know what it's liable to do.
Yeah, that was part of my job for about 10 years. I was on a wreck crew, and it got interesting some days. You're right about that. It really did. But the bad part is they never had derailments when it was sunny and 70 degrees. It was always 3 in the morning and 0 or snow up to your butt or whatever, and it was always ugly weather, it seemed like. But yeah, that was a go. That's not now.
Okay, we're going to move now to completely unrehearsed segment of our presentation today, and that's hopefully it'll go okay with Mr. Fred Soward, who is going to impart to us information about cab bus Wi-Fi interface, a solution, a good solution.
Thank you, sir. So we've pretty much gone from the East Coast all the way out to the West Coast now, because most of you know that our centered around Monterey Bay, Central California. Oops, I'm muted. No, I'm not. Okay, there we go. So most of you know, again, our railroad is centered around Monterey Bay, which has nothing at all to do with presentation, because it's really how to make this thing go. We're in the early stages of making the railroad go. So instead of putting an entire DCC system in, I wanted something very basic. Now, I do have an NCE power cab, and I could run trains a little bit back and forth, do a little bit of switching, but I was tethered by that thing and didn't really want to set something up. And then I found a solution from an Australian company. It's called NCE Cab Bus Wi-Fi Interface. It's very similar to the WiFiTrax LNWI, or what is that? LocoNet Wi-Fi interface. Very similar, except this does not come from NCE. It comes from a third party. The WiFiTrax LocoNet solution, of course, comes straight from WiFiTrax. Very easy to set up, fairly cost effective, and we'll talk about that. And I'll talk about some of the challenges we had as we got this set up on the railroad here. It's called a WFD-30 though. This is what it looks like. It's from WiFiTrax, and if you want to look at this online and see all the details about it, there's the URL right there on the picture. It's www.wifitrax.com. There is a US distributor, so it won't cost you international shipping charges to get it to your house. We'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later as well. All right, moving right along here, real quick like, what does it do? Well, it gives me Wi-Fi control of all the trains using a wireless device. And by wireless device, we're talking about a smartphone, a tablet, a pad like an iPad or something like that, using an app. On the iPhone side, on the Apple side of it, of course, WiThrottle, or if you're running an Android phone, Engine Driver. There are free versions of those, and there are paid versions as well. Even the paid versions are not all that expensive, so we're not talking, hundreds of dollars here to get this up and running. Using this, I can control up to 4 trains without having a Wi-Fi access point. So no wireless access point is built into that module. I don't have to have a computer. I don't have to have JMRI. I just plug this thing into one of the ports on my system, and it works. It's amazing. But wait, let's do a little bit of backup here, okay? So I've got a set of tracks. I got a couple of wires hooked up. I got a DCC command station. And then I connect a throttle to it. Standard stuff. Set of tracks, couple wires, command station, got a throttle hardware to it. You can, of course, and I think most everybody on the call today knows, use some type of wireless connection between throttle and DCC command station as well, if they're set up to do that. Not going to go in there. I just want to acknowledge that, yes, you can do that, but I have to go buy a throttle either from the manufacturer or a third-party provider who can talk to that particular brand of DCC command station that you have. Regardless of what it is, you got to have something. Well, what if I want to talk to it with my smartphone or my tablet, iPad, whatever I happen to have? Can do that. The standard way that most people do that is they set up a computer, they install JMRI, they have an adapter that goes between the computer and the DCC command station, and then they set up a wireless access point, which can finally allow the smartphone to talk to the locomotive on the tracks. Rube Goldberg would be proud if he took a look at this, in all this electronics that's required. You go from a smartphone through an wireless access point to computer with another app installed through an adapter that goes to a command station that finally talks to locomotive. I've used this on various model railroads in Louisville and outside of Louisville as I've done ops around the country. usually works well until it doesn't, and then it doesn't for the rest of the ops session, and because nobody can figure out what went wrong. But when it works, it's great. There's a lot to get it set up. Thought about that myself and said, you know what, do I really want to fire up a computer and another access point every single time I want to run the railroad down here? And the answer was, I really didn't want to. I wanted something very basic, very simple. And that's what this WFD30 gives me. Smartphone, tablet app. With the app, I got this WiFiTrax WFD30. I do have to hardwire it, but it plugs into a port from my NCE system. I don't have to have an adapter or anything. And my smartphone talks directly to it. That's all I had to do. Throw $100 out there, about $109 actually, for the WiFiTrax. Hook it into the port that I already have here for the power cab. And I'm talking. Well, okay, there's a little more to it than that. But really, as far as the connections are concerned, that's all it takes. So what would you rather do? I know what I'd rather do. There's a couple other advantages to using it as well, other than just, I'm starting the railroad here. I don't want to set up a lot of stuff. It gives me some flexibility. We'll talk about some of those other advantages a little bit later. Compatibility, you got to have an NCE command station. Now, it can be, as in my case, a power cab that's running in master mode. If you're not familiar with NCE, all that really means is the power cab can run as either a command station and also be a throttle, or you can have it connected to another command station, in which case it is a throttle only. So it's kind of a neat thing with a power cab, okay? And if you don't know what one looks like, you're going to see a picture here in a moment. Very important, version 1.65B Bravo is required. I am the reason for an FAQ on the WiFiTrax website, because when I started using this thing, I did not have a 1.65B version of the power cab chip in my throttle. Took a while to figure it out, and we could spend the whole 20 minutes talking about the troubleshooting that we went to. Not going to go there. I will tell you that it didn't work, it didn't work, it didn't work. I read through the instructions, had Barbara read through the instructions. Russ came over with a couple of cables thinking that might be the problem. He read through the instructions, wouldn't work. Took the system to Russ's house, plugged it in, immediately it worked, and I went, aha. So I got hold of the WiFiTrax people. We talked it back and forth and determined it was a 1.65. It was the chip that was the problem. Fixed it with a $30 chip from NCE. It took me about 20 minutes to install the thing, only because there's about a dozen long screws on the back of the power cab. If it hadn't been for that, it would have been a 5-minute fix. Put it in, put it back together, worked like a charm. All right, so that's what the power cab looks like. No big deal. Very easy to figure out what version you're running. If you don't know how, you can holler at me, or you can just read the online stuff and it'll talk to you about how to do that. All right, so hardware connection setup. Basically, we connect the WFD30 to the right-hand socket on the power cab panel, which is one of those little ports that you see on the front of a fascia. Power on the command station / power cab. Okay, when you do that, there you go. All right, next thing, set the Wi-Fi network to the advertised SSID. If you don't know what the SSID is, easy to figure that out. Turn on your phone, go to wireless connections, go to Wi-Fi in there, and it'll be advertised. It'll show you right there. It usually starts at WFX, that's the one. Set the app to the server name, select the locomotive DCC address, and go. Honestly, it takes about that long to make it work. So I'm going to go through the screens real quick just to show you how it works. Again, you power on the system. You power on the system, get the little red light. If this looks wrong to some of you, if it looks like I have the photo upside down, it's not. On our network, I have made a conscious decision to put all the PCCP panels in upside down, because I like the red dot on the top, and I like the little clicky things for the network cables on the top. I don't like them on the bottom. I think it's a lot more secure that way and a lot easier to get them in and out without breaking off those tabs. That's the way that you'll find most network connections for Ethernet as well, with the tab on the top. So that's the way we're going to do it here. So when it says use the right panel or the right port, it's actually the left port in our case. But no big deal. All right, this is what it looks like from the back. No big deal. All right, actually, this is the one for the panel. There's the power cab coming on. And this is what you see on the actual WFD30. So you got 3 lights on there. Off on the right, you can see the blue one and the red one. That shows me that the cab is running. It's got power. And whenever I talk to it with the iPhone, I'm using an iPhone or an iPad, the little net light will pop on and off as well. And there you go. That's how I've actually got it mounted. And because it's just a temporary solution down there, we've got a piece of gator board with command strips so that we can attach and detach it fairly easily. That's what they look like side by side. And as you can see, they're on the 2 ports on the right on the WFD30. There's a cable coming out of one. That cable is going to the left port on the NCE panel. So I've got my iPhone on. As I said, it usually starts WFT something. That's it, WiFiTrax. I just select that in settings for Wi-Fi. I go into my iPhone, find the correct app, and I'm using WiThrottle because I paid for the full version. There are a couple features in there that allows me to do things that the light version won't do. One of the things is it allows me to run 2 locomotives at the same time. There are times, especially in Tom Gunther's layout in some areas, where you have a local switcher that you can use in addition to your road engine to move things, and I will do that. I'll be running 2 locomotives at the same time, for example, Den and Loyal. Next thing we do, go into the app, and it says device name, so forth, but I need to go down to the bottom right. That's where the arrow is, and just click on settings, and I will select the server. So the first screen back here, I've connected my iPhone to basically the access point that's built into this WFD30. This one connects to the server inside that little module. And there it is, SN33, whatever it happens to be, you just select it. You don't have any choices. Confirm that it's selected by going back to this screen. And then you go to the addresses. Now, these are locomotives that I have running in here right now. So 3204 is my SD 45T-2 over there, and 5625 is my little GP9 in Black Widow scheme. You know, so I could select one of those. And if you've ever done this before, it's really easy. You can select from the recent list, or you can click the keypad button that's right next to it, or roster, or whatever. Then you select the number, or if you do the keypad, you type the number of the locomotive in, and then you say set. Once you say set, the number should appear up there, should be green. Go back to the throttle tab or button, and guys, we're running trains. That's it. That is what it takes. It is so cool. It works so quick. So where do you buy it? You can go to the WiFiTrax website if you want to, but you'll have to pay for shipping from Australia to do that. Now, before pandemic set in and flights were, restricted and curtailed to a certain extent, he actually offered free shipping. Forget that. Go to the U.S. distributor, and if you go to the WiFiTrax site, there's a link in there where you can click, show me the local distributors and so forth. And it's Iron Planet Hobbies out of Springfield, Missouri. $109.99 with free shipping. Took about 2 days to get here. Bob Weinheimer ordered one of these after I gave him a personal one-on-one demo one day. I think he waited about a day and went off and ordered one, and it took him about 2 days to get it all the way into Charleston, West Virginia as well. So that is my little presentation, real quick, down and dirty. Also found out that Darcy Elliott here in town has one of these. The way I found out that Darcy has one is he actually did a presentation for the Central Indiana NMRA group up there as well. So unless there are questions, I'd be done, Ron.
Well, Russ says he's definitely up to getting one of these as soon as he can afford it after the signal system. So don't ever plan on seeing it on Russ's layout.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, I'll tell you one of the other advantages of this thing is that it allows guys to use their mobile devices with a single app. So if you're running on Chris Broughton's layout, you have an iPhone, you load up the Y throttle, you come to my layout eventually once you can, you load up the Y throttle, you're using the same app. It's the same exact throttle, even though his is Digitrax and mine is NCE. It makes it a lot easier, I think, for a lot of guys. They don't have to go, okay, now what are the key, which buttons do I push here? Which buttons don't I push, going from a Digitrax system to an NCE system and back and forth. All that's taken care of. It's one system. I think it makes it a lot easier for the guys. For me as a layout owner, that's 4 throttles I don't have to buy. And if I connect it through an actual Wi-Fi access point, and there is an option to do that, I can run up to 8 for each one of these. I can connect multiples of these to the layout itself. So I can have 3 of these going, not use an access point. And we actually have, I eliminate the need to buy 12 iPhones, or 12 throttles from NCE or something like that. Of course, that means bring your own, or I have a phone or a pad here that you can use. So those are a couple of the other advantages. I think it's a neat solution. It's not for everybody, obviously, just like the Digitrax LNWI is not for everybody either. But I think it's a solution that any layout owner with either NCE for this or Digitrax for the LNWI really should look at and consider. And that's what I got. Anybody else?
I was at a
Jim
train
from Rio,
show one time, and there was I forget the name of the guys from Cincinnati, the big modular group that travels around a lot.
Miami Valley?
Yeah, I think it was the Miami Valley guys, but they had the first smartphone setup that I had seen, working with, they had the JMRI and a regular router at the time. Yeah. But they just went to Walmart and bought a whole bunch of what, the term burner phones.
Yep.
And they didn't have to sign them up for service or anything. They just downloaded the app, and they had a whole pile of $20 throttles.
Yep.
Before everybody had a smartphone in their pocket.
Yep.
They went out and just got, 6 or 8 at $20 a pop. And the hardest thing they had to do is keep up with the chargers. and so, yeah, so system works great. It really does.
It does. Yep.
The Android app is free. It's the same basic setup as the paid version for the iPhone. I'm not sure why that is, but that's just the way that it works.
That's because anybody can afford an iPhone is not going to sweat the price on a.
Well, yeah, the big money guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, keep in mind, it's 2 different groups that have produced those apps.
I thought it was the same guy that produced the
I don't think so.
iPhone app. Might be. I guess they work together since he's selling it or supporting it. Steve, what's his name?
I don't know.
The other thing that Fred didn't mention is with this system, you don't have a bunch of model railroaders on your home network. They're strictly on this local network.
That is true.
And the other solution, the other way to handle that is to, use an old router you have laying around the house for your model railroad to keep people off your home network.
Yep.
Any other questions or comments for Fred?
Just Jim and Reno. I was
can you
just
hear
going to say, I got enough throttles I don't need anymore, but I might have to consider that once. Every once in a while, we seem to run out. Good presentation. Thanks.
Thanks, sir.
I did have one question. I've got an old iPhone 5C, I think it is, which currently does not have service. It's still a good working phone. In order to use it as a throttle, do I basically have to contact Verizon or somebody and put it in service?
Should not have to, Bob. You should be able to put it on a Wi-Fi network and then pull the app down from there.
Okay.
Yeah,
should-
Bob.
Yeah.
Bob, I too have an old iPhone that I just use as an alarm, but it's still it does everything but get phone calls. So
And
Okay.
you might find, Bob, if you plug it in. I had an old Samsung phone that I decided to sell a few months back, and I plugged it in, and all of a sudden I hadn't used it in a year and a half. It started downloading all the updates, security updates from my previous character. So the same might happen to you. And you can't make any calls with it, but that's the only thing. You can still run apps with it. You can still run your railroad with it. It's a
Okay.
viable phone for doing everything. I mean, it's basically like an iPad with no phone service.
I had some,
and
That-
for Jim,
I had some photographs on it that I downloaded to the computer, and that's the only thing I've done to it lately. But the battery seems to hold a charge, so I thought I might be able to use it in some manner, like a throttle.
Yeah, still a viable tool.
and for Jim, going back, that when Fred came
No,
over here,
no. I'll just put everything in the refrigerator and no, if I get hungry.
Huh?
Hey, Mark, if we get hungry, can we come over too?
Yeah.
for Jim, when Fred came over here to what we're troubleshooting and everything, it really works neat. So that's why I've been considering it. But this guy's kind of picking my pocket right now. So
Yeah.
Well, your stimulus check will be there pretty soon, so keep that in mind for part of it. Put it back in the economy.
well, listen, you got to tell me how to get it past my CFO. So
Well, I got to tell you guys, my mom is 98 years old. My sister called a week or two ago, and she said they had called her from the nursing home to let her know that mom's stimulus check had come in. What she's going to do with it, I have no clue.
yeah, so Steve's on his way to Cleveland to kind of bootleg that.
Yeah.
Maybe she'd like to invest in a signal system.
Yeah.
There you
Yeah.
go.
Some signals.
There you go.
Okay. What about anything else? Anybody have anything else we need to be talking about before we sign off? Anyone?
I'm
Thanks
good.
to everyone.
I enjoyed it.
Informative, good stuff.
Good
Thank
stuff.
you.
Glad we're doing it. Thanks, Ron and Fred.
Thank you to our presenters today, including Fred.
Well, thanks, everybody. Even I understood some of it.